Howdy there, friends, family, adversaries, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary folks. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Riley Constantine, and today we are talking about the Ghost of Tsushima, the new samurai action game by the studio Sucker Punch. This is a spoiler-free take of the impressions of the game I have so far. I haven't completed it. In fact, I'm not even close to completing it, but I just wanted to give you my thoughts on how I feel about the game at this moment. And if anything changes, I am more than willing to do a second or even a third impressions video for the Ghost of Tsushima. And so yeah, that's that. And with that, on to the video. Ghost of Tsushima is all about aesthetic. This new game by developer Sucker Punch, the studio behind the infamous and the Sly Cooper series, is a new IP that pays homage to classic samurai films by acclaimed Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa's films had made a significant cultural impact in both Eastern and Western cinema when they released back in the mid-20th century. In fact, Kurosawa films like Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, Hidden Fortress, and Throne of Blood heavily influenced many westerns like Good, Bad, and the Ugly and The Magnificent Seven, which copied many of Kurosawa's storytelling conceits as well as the aesthetic of his films, which is even more relevant for the topic of this video. Also worth noting that Kurosawa's Throne of Blood also contains the best death by arrow scene in cinematic history. Wow, way to make Boromir look like a patsy. The Kurosawa samurai film aesthetic is especially important when discussing Ghost of Tsushima. After all, despite taking place in feudal Japan and featuring Japanese characters, Ghost of Tsushima is a Western game made by an American studio containing developers who are clearly fans of Kurosawa's work. With the cinematic visual landscapes, samurai Western gameplay, sword duels, and the option to play with Japanese voiceovers, and in grainy black and white, Ghost of Tsushima is a true love letter to Kurosawa movies. Ghost of Tsushima aims and, in many respects, nails that certain Kurosawa style of film, i.e. its aesthetic. However, Ghost of Tsushima does not land emotionally. Despite being inspired by Kurosawa's work, Sucker Punch's new game misses the political and cultural intricacies of Kurosawa's films, and much of this is due to the developer's Western lens. Despite how the game contains lights-out sword combat and one of the most gorgeous visual art styles in a console video game, the story is a complete drag. An emotionless black hole save for the stoic characters that drone on and on about honor and how much they hate Mongolians. It's just so boring. And just imagine me talking through this whole video with an emotionless voice. Joy, desire have been sucked into a vacuum, along with my spare pocket change. This is the new normal. Oh. What really gets me is that Sucker Punch nails the visual and combat aesthetic of Kurosawa's movies, but Ghost of Tsushima lacks the heart and soul found in Kurosawa's films. In terms of its story, Ghost of Tsushima lacks personality, and this is abundantly clear with the dull main character, Jin Sakai. The plot follows Jin as he utilizes his samurai skill set to undermine and defeat the Mongolian forces that have invaded the Japanese island of Tsushima, and let's just say that Jin is not a fan of the Mongolians and their open concept kitchens. Jin is furious with the Mongolians because they slaughtered so many of his samurai brethren, and the leader of the Mongolian army captured Jin's uncle. This is supposed to be the emotional thrust that's meant to make you care narratively and motivate you to do your actions throughout the game, but it's just so drab. Ghost of Tsushima is essentially a revenge story that failed to inspire much emotional resonance within me. The characters are dull and one note, and Jin's uncle being held hostage by the Mongolian leader is not a strong enough motivation alone to get me invested in the story, historical landscape, and the characters. The narrative is just so lacking in any personality in any meaningful way that I groan whenever the game transitions to the lengthy and all too numerous cutscenes, because the story and the characters presenting a lack of meaningful emotion, save for stoicism, is so fucking boring. This game is even more miserable than The Last of Us Part 2. Hell, The Last of Us Part 2 had a broader range of characters with varying emotions and personalities more so than the one-note and grim Ghost of Tsushima. Even though The Last of Us Part 2 may be criticized by some folks as misery porn, no relation, that misery porn descriptor is way more justified when ascribing it to Ghost of Tsushima, because the characters and the act of me watching the characters are both equally unenjoyable. Yes, I know The Last of Us Part 2 is a very grim, dark, serious story, but there was an actual range of emotions there that, gave brevity and had some lighter moments peppered in, whereas Ghost of Tsushima is just serious all the time, and it's dull. You likely will not be logging in hours upon hours of playtime in this game just for its story alone. I know I didn't. Instead, Ghost of Tsushima's gameplay is what reels me back in and ensures that the game is still worth playing despite such an abysmal story. In fact, the sword combat in particular is stellar. To start, there are basic light and heavy attacks, as well as a dodge button and a parry button that you need to press precisely to either sidestep or counterattack various enemy types that each have their own combat strategies. This admittedly sounds fairly typical to the style of open-world stealth action games, but the action gets really interesting once you gain access to new combat stances. As you progress in Ghost of Tsushima, Jin learns different combat stances that counter specific enemy types, and the player can fluidly transition into these stances in mid-combat, meaning that the game grants you with more tactical options than it first appears. It is great, and add in all the different gadgets you can swap out in real time, as well as the rewarding upgrade and progression systems, and you have a game that is incredibly fun to play and is satisfying once you figure out the rhythmic flows of combat. Once again, aesthetic. Admittedly, there are some imperfections with the combat. The stealth is very basic and rudimentary compared to other stealth action titles, where a game like The Last of Us Part 2 gifts the player with an assortment of options to tackle enemy encounters, programmed with smart AI for the record, in sneaky quiet style. I rarely felt rewarded for self-killing enemies with bad AI, save for one or two, before hilariously charging headfirst into heavily fortified enemy strongholds like Leroy Jenkins, but successful. However, when you get past the lackluster stealth, the delectable sword combat itself only has minor flaws, mostly due to the camera and the auto lock-on features, which usually function well, but do not work 100% of the time. Like, there are a few moments when I wondered what the hell my character was doing. The only real major problem with combat is when it ends, because usually when the combat encounters are over, the game transitions to yet another dreary, dull, boring cutscene. And when that happens, God help us all. Additionally, the combat is not helped by the typical Ubisoft-style open-world checklist of objectives that makes Ghost of Tsushima feel like busy work sometimes, i.e. bandit camps, special weapon quests, and world-building collectibles that I don't give a flying fuck about. To be honest, the mission design is very dreary and detracts from Ghost of Tsushima's overall experience. While this type of stealth action open-world format worked in Horizon Zero Dawn, one of my favorite games this console generation by the way, Horizon Zero Dawn had a wide variety of fantastical enemy types, a unique combat system, different spins on the usual Ubisoft checklist quests, and a great story, whereas Ghost of Tsushima just has great combat with a few of its own open-world uniquities, like the guiding wind that directs the player where to go rather than a destination marker, Jin's loyal horse who comes to your side when called, no matter how improbable, or the cinematic blade duels, which are quite awesome. Aesthetics! However, those open-world nifty features and the combat alone are not enough to make Ghost of Tsushima feel like a complete experience. Where Horizon Zero Dawn transformed our perceptions of what a AAA stealth action open-world game could be, Ghost of Tsushima just isn't as inspired in its level design or its narrative hooks. The great combat is the only aspect that is really satisfying to play here. The only other element in Ghost of Tsushima that matches the combat in quality is its gorgeous visual art style. It is jaw-droppingly beautiful and borderline orgasmic. Ghost of Tsushima is pretty. There is such an array of vibrant colors and detailed landscapes that this game reminds me of Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon in that it looks like a high-definition painting in motion. The color of the flowers, water, trees, and even the grass are so awe-inspiringly picturesque that I often found myself ogling at the visuals presented to me, to the point that I was tempted to fool around with the game's extensive photo mode, which I rarely ever do in a video game these days. Sorry to say, photography majors cannot take pictures this fucking good. Armor customization that benefits gameplay, style, appearance, and color is a big deal in Ghost of Tsushima as well. And even though the unlockable cosmetic items haven't been extensive so far in my playthrough, it is wonderful that you can earn all of these items in-game, and there is no sleazy loot box or microtransaction monetization systems that make the game grindier and less satisfying to play. Playing a game can be fun and rewarding? Who fucking knew? Up to where I'm at in the game, Ghost of Tsushima is worth playing for its combat and its visual style alone. While there are serious story issues, a fair number of glitches, some uninspired quest design, and just very average stealth elements, I do not regret the time I have spent with Ghost of Tsushima. While I'm not binging this title like I did with The Last of Us Part 2, I am enjoying taking an hour or two out of my day to play it. So with that, I'm more than comfortable giving Ghost of Tsushima a lukewarm recommendation. If you need a strong narrative or are just really tired of Ubisoft-style formula stealth action open world games, you should probably look for a different game. But if you are looking for a satisfying combat system with a gorgeous visual art style that is aesthetically pleasing, look for no further because Ghost of Tsushima might be the game for you. Aesthetic. And with that, I'd like to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones and Slasher Veils, Mom, Miles Nelson, and David Devlin. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all. All right, 3, 2, 1.